from the beginning, yeah? So this is a VCL application, right? It looks quite standard, doesn't it? Except that it's not really standard. It's made with a couple of techniques that are probably completely new for you. So basic idea is that if you want to share code, you have to give up your current architecture for the most part. And you have to redesign it completely to take into account the cross-platform bits, okay? So there are many reasons you might want to do that. As you can see, there are a couple of, well, yeah. There are also technical reasons. To do that. So how do we do this, though? So the basic idea is that you have to look at the functionality first. Not at the forms, not at data modules. Those are secondary concerns in this way of doing software, okay? As I say, the customer list form is not about the customer form, it's about the customer. It's about the customer list. That's the important bit of the customer list form. You see what I'm saying? This is where you have to start from, okay? You must use generic classes, obviously. My example is for 11.2, which has some specific features that I'm using to make things easier. You can kind of work around that if you are on 11.1 or 10.4, stuff like that. But I do strongly advise that you use 11.2 because you will see the code is much easier that way, okay? So to go with the slides, maybe we should look at a bit of code, just so we're clear on what we're doing. There is a lot of stuff here, okay? So let's begin from the core concepts. This is 11.2, okay? This is not available in 11.1. But as you can see, it makes defining our uses much easier, okay? And the same stuff with this. This TXP control, is cross-platform control, is defined differently, but we refer to it all over the place. And you can do this with any actual class you need that is present in both VCL and FireMonkey with a different name, okay? You can do the same thing with every class you need this for, okay? Now, the basic idea is that UI concept is basically the functional code, okay? So if you go into the main unit, see that it's empty. There are only 3 tabs. There is very little actual code in there. Okay. Why? Because all the code is done here in the make new. See, we have a cross-platform UI, login UI concept, and T-login concept derives from that. And it uses a frame that is the VCL one. Okay. So the way you do this is basically by splitting up your UI and make it work as little as you can. Okay. So if you look at this, if you look at this, this is all required. This is all going in the VCL part, but oh, come on. If you look at it, everything is defined in here, you see? So when you are in the main VCL code and you go in the register frame, for example, in the login frame, hold on. Right. You see the code is in, hold on. Yeah. Hold on. Yeah. See, this is what we do. We use the UI control. To click the registration button. And if there are no users, what it does, oh, fantastic. Yay, marvelous. See, this is the login button, and you can register new users. Or if you press cancel, you can go back. No, you can't. Thought you could. Anyway. Oh, wonderful. Okay. So as you can see, there are a couple of things here. One is the messages using system.messaging. This is what is being processed in your application. Okay, you only go through messages. Now, the advantage of this is that when you have a message flow, right, you can use this to document the flow of the application. So the diagrams that you create to document the flow can be used by many different people, because now you're not dealing with documentation code, you're dealing with flow documentation. And this allows people to actually have a look at it and see what's going on. This is very useful for sales, for support, for everyone. And you produce it once. Produce it once and you can use it. This, alongside the concepts idea, which are basically a way to abstract what's going on in the actual application and give it a uniform facade, you know. This allows you to really be free in what you do. This technique does not just work for different platforms. It also works for different UI libraries. So if you are on TMS and you want to go to DevExpress or the other way around, this is also useful for that. Because you can simply create a new section with all the new UI, with all the new components, and you can replace it on the go. As you go along, you can replace it, you know? But by the end of it, if you really transfer everything on this style of coding, you have a completely different application, okay? That is a lot easier to maintain, that is a lot easier to create new functionality for, and whose functionality can be integrated in the other versions very easily, okay? Because the biggest chunk of the stuff is not actually in the specific application, it's in the broader business layer. Okay. Now, this is just an example of the kind of thing you have to do, but that doesn't mean that you have to do it just like I am doing it. Okay. This is more of, you have to use this kind of code, but then your system is different than mine, you know, so you may have different requirements. You might need to do things slightly differently, but as long as you keep the same kind of structure, you will be fine. Do you know what I'm saying? Are you following along? Hello?
Yep.
Sort of.
So I'm not sure who said sort of, but anyway, feel free to ask questions. Do you have any specific question you want to ask?
I guess if I have, I don't know, some control, what am I actually doing to it?
Pardon?
Like if I had a P edit or something, what would I be doing to it?
You would be wrapping it into a UI concept and use it indirectly. Okay. So what you do is you register messages for it. That's the idea. Well, for example, there is the rich view, which I am fairly sure has system messaging messages as well, I think. But anyway, for example, if you're using, if you have actions, something you could do is, instead of using, you know, register messages, you could use the actions inside the class, the concept class, and then simply expose a messaging layer outside, you know. This is all about flexibility and about the ability to do things in ways that don't disrupt what you have too much in terms of general behavior. Because what you want is to be able to make it work for the future. Do you see what I'm saying?
So we're saying it's fundamentally an abstraction layer.
Yes,
yeah,
it is. It's an abstraction layer that you have to define first, and then you reuse over and over again. And the refinement of how much abstraction you need will be dictated by the requirement of your system, you know? There are some systems that have a need, for example, for a very big message structure, and there are others instead that need not very much of that.
So, for example, you'd be putting all of your business rules into the abstraction layer?
Your business layer talks to the abstraction layer, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the abstraction layer talks to the UI, for example.
Yeah. So you might have multiple UEs depending on the circumstances.
For example, the data module here. The data module has a register messages as well, you see? And when you go into it, you see everything. It receives a message and sends a message. So all you're doing is using messages back and forth, okay? And everything has to pass through those. Is this a bit clearer now? So for example, you first call for the number of users, and this could be, you know, this could be a call, a REST call, for example, or a call to the database, to the middle tier, whatever, doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is you have to call the message. And then the data module or whatever, or the class or whatever it is that you're using, will process that message in a way that the UI doesn't know, because the UI only gets back the result of that message request. And by doing so, besides separating everything and having it neatly divided, you also make it stateless, because you're obliged to make it stateless, you know, because that's the only way you can do this. And by making it stateless, you gain a lot of more advantages. You know? You see what I'm saying? That's one of the biggest problems with Delphi systems, that they are completely stateful. And this allows you to even get ready, for example, to have a cloud server, for example, in the future, if that's what you want. You know?
Or you could have both running simultaneously. So depending on whether the client was coming over HTTP or...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, you have to give up your current design. That's... You're not going to get this with your current, you know, usual design. You have to give it up. You have to think differently, completely differently about your system.
Is it something like the concept of object relational model?
Is that, say it again, please?
Is it something like the concept of an object relational model?
It kind of, I would define, well, I have come up with a term for what I do, and that's parafunctional programming. It's a lot more similar to functional programming than it is to object-oriented programming in itself. especially to make things stateless, you know. The attempt here is to have a repeatable process, okay? So every time you send a specific message, you need to receive the same answer. You have to calculate the same answer based on a specific set of instructions. Do you see what I'm saying? So if you send a message that has a bad username or password, you have to retrieve a message that says you couldn't be logged in because you have a bad username or password every single time. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I call it a parafunctional way of developing things. And it's a lot to take in. I'm not saying that it's easy. This is bloody hard. But the potential this has is enormous.
Just looking
Because
at,
now you're looking at a simple demo application. But imagine if you had everything like this. How much easier would it would be for people to follow along?
just looking at your code that you got on the screen, your user DAL has state, hasn't it?
Nope.
Well, it's got like, got a, can we go back to that where we had it?
Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Because this is, oh, come on. Right. Okay.
So it's a list of users. So that's a list of, that's stateful.
Pardon? That's a list of users, but this is a fake DAL. Okay. This is just to this is just to show you this is actually loaded completely from the dataset. Okay. And it's just to show what you could do, but actually this will probably be a remote call of some kind. Okay, or a call to the object, to the ORM, for example.
So your state's going out to a database, is it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's the state is not, you can conserve some state, but most of the state, most of the things that cause trouble, that has to go. And you have no other choice. And this is kind of what I'm saying here, okay? You have basically no other choice, because by using messages back and forth, you have to have all the information that you need in the message. And you send different messages for different situations. And that's where you spread the state along. And you don't have the kind of state that plagues Delphi systems anymore. Make sense?
Are you saying, sorry, I've been, I apologize that I've been driving to pick up a child and I couldn't follow along as well as I have liked to. I'm interested in what you're saying about, you know, semi-functional approach, because I've been influenced by that for the last year or so. Sorry. When you mention, are you saying carrying state along with the messages, that's a good thing? Like the...
I'm saying that if you have a login problem, for example, of a username and password that are not correct, that's one message. If you have a problem because the user is disabled, that's another message. If you have a problem,
sorry, go ahead.
if you have a problem because the user has been banned for whatever reason, that's yet another message.
So one thing that, again, I'm sorry that I wasn't right up with the content, but you mentioned calling a function should be in a sense pure, that every time you call it, you get the same answer.
Yes.
And I was just wondering then, for example, for a login, you know, databases can change. Someone might, you know, pay their membership or something or other. And I was just going to ask you how that would relate to that sort of login thing, where perhaps the answer can change over time.
The answer can change over time, yes, for the single user.
Right.
But not for the system.
Right.
So if a user is overdue, the user is overdue. Doesn't matter which user. The important thing is that if you have a user that is overdue, every time that this should be signaled, it will be signaled always in the same way.
Right. Gotcha.
Does it make sense now?
Thank you.
This is the essence of what functional programming actually does. For every set of data that is in a specific configuration, you get the same answer every single time. And the user messages goes up to a point there. And the user messages is also another big advantage, which is that you can look for them. You can look for them. You can look in all the project group, and you will see where it's used. Every single place where it's used.
So again, I have to apologize if I'm asking off the questions in the wrong direction, because like I said, I couldn't hear while I was driving. But one of the, I guess, sort of famous functional issues is that like incorporating the muddy awfulness of the real world has to be incorporated into the, you know, the pure code that you write in some way. And I've heard of things like state monad and
yeah, exactly.
in Haskell, famously the hello world example is like chapter 13 instead of chapter page 1.
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't yet found a way to make Delphi completely functional yet. And yet being the operative word here. But this goes a long way towards that.
Okay, I'll be interested to check back on the. That's great. I'll love to look back on the recording and the code. That'd be great. Thank you.
Oh well, I can absolutely provide you the code. I think that.
Oh, sorry, I assumed it was like a GitHub or something.
No. It's not, because reasons. Mostly because I have no time and I'm lazy.
Sure. I approve this message.
But yeah, it should go at some point on GitHub sometime. But for now, it's only because I have used this with DEFCON. I'm waiting for them to publish it and gain a bit of an advantage from it before making it widely available.
Yes, of course, no problem.
And again, I know that a lot of you are saying, I will never do this because this is too complicated. And I completely understand that. but it is necessary if you want to stay in business for the long term. Because the cloud is expanding and you will have no choice rather soon. You either go this way or you will have to keep patching things and reworking things. And you know you do.
So would you say this makes things more compositional as far as combining?
This kind of code, not exactly this code, but this sort of code will take you much farther along than your current system. Because let's be honest, all of us have some kind of on-post event in a dataset somewhere in the code. Because at the time, hey, that was a brilliant idea, but it's not any longer. And you know that. And times change, and the code has to change with the times. I just know that a lot of you have been telling people, hold on, don't change that so quickly, because that, you know, that's very convoluted, it's very old, it cannot be changed easily, right? I know every one of you has had this conversation at some point with somebody, right? This is a way to make the changes that are needed without losing the knowledge and setting it up for further success down the line for the system. It's annoying, it's difficult, it's a nightmare in some ways, but you have no choice, basically. Not if you want to be up there for the future. Sorry.
So in some ways, Andre, we're saying that you've got, oh, how do I put this? You've got an abstraction layer which incorporates all of your business rules and stuff like that. And you might have multiple separate modules in terms of the implementation. And rather than having to go through your whole program, if you had feature changes, you might only have to modify one or two modules rather than the whole framework.
Yes, exactly. And if you want to add a completely new feature, you create the messages, you create the code that handles the messages, which is the actual meat of the feature. And then you simply have to deal with the UI part.
Yep.
And you don't deal with all the messages. You only deal with the ones that are relevant to you. Do you see what I'm saying? If you have a new developer coming on, you don't have to say, well, yeah, this is in unit A, unit C, unit Z, unit XY, and then maybe there is something in the core. No, you just say, look for this message. Look what it is used. Look what it's called. That's a lot easier, isn't it? How much time is wasted in getting new developers on board because one reference was missed? That's time completely wasted. With this, there is no guesswork, you know? And again, if you want to give a salesperson a documentation, certainly the registered user sounds a lot easier than, I don't know, the user registration screen, you know, and you can point arrows. Salespeople love arrows, you know. They love that kind of thing where they can just, you know, follow along. Any more confusion?
Can you do this a little bit at a time?
Yes, you absolutely can. You can start with something relatively easy, but crucial, like, I don't know, the login, the registration, stuff like that. You have to start with something meaningful, but you also have to start with something meaningful and that has not too many consequences all over the system. So things like contact screens, order lists, this sort of thing is fine. You know, you can start with those. And then you build on them. The main thing here, the main difficulty you will find is that you will not get the initial structure right soon. It will take you a few tries before you get it right. Okay, you have to know that, because your code currently is nowhere near as simple to use to turn it into that. So you will have to think deeply about what exactly you want to change and where. Okay, there was a question coming in.
Yeah, it looks to me like you're having a concept, no, a UI concept layer for each form or each unit.
I have a concept for each functionality.
Okay,
and in some
can
cases,
I continue with my question? Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry.
And like in the screen in front of us, we have main VCL code and then to-do list VCL code. So does that mean you have another set for the FMX ones?
Yes, you have an abstraction layer that is common. And then that abstraction layer has to become concrete in VCL and FMX. Okay. And they are two separate branches. But the core is the common stuff. This data module, for example, is used by both. Why? Because the class group is T-persistent. This is a cross-platform module. Okay. If you use this class group, you can use it in both sides. Now, the disadvantage of using this class group is that this module cannot in any way host any VCL or FireMonkey specific component. Okay. Only things that work on both. Then if you want to add specific components, you will have to inherit this data module and use the correct class group. Okay. But that's fine, because this will contain everything that is common. See, such as the login message, the number of users, the register, whatever. And it will send back something that the UI can process. In some cases, it will be handled by the same data module. In other cases, it will be handled by the UI. In other cases, by some other data module that is system-wide and that needs that kind of message. It's a lot of work, and it's not easy to find the right configuration to use, but it's necessary work for the long term.
How's this compared to the MVVM design pattern or architecture?
Sorry, can you please repeat the question?
How's this architecture compared to the MVVM architecture? Because in the MVVM, the
Oh yeah. Well, the MVVM style of applications is predicated on forms and data modules and not on functionality. Okay, I would say that this is the biggest difference. When you do MVVM, you get a broadly similar result, okay, but through completely different means. If your code in the origin is unwieldy, by using MVVM, the temptation to stay with the unwieldy code is really compelling. Okay? This kind of code obliges you to actually do something about the unwieldy code. And also, MVVM does not make nearly as simple to document your application for sales and support, and generally speaking, obviously, and it doesn't make really easy for example, new people or people from a different section of the code to look through everything just by following a breadcrumb. These are the main advantages of this kind of code. Your bang for the buck is the fact that you can sell it at different levels to different stakeholders. With MVVM, you are always, you can always be tempted to keep the unwieldy code, to keep the complexity, or the unneeded complexity, or the complexity in the wrong place. Does that make sense?
yeah. Thank you.
With this kind of code, that becomes really hard. You are really obliged to look at it.
If you are refactoring an existing project or
Pardon?
application, and the project already adopts either some of the architectures out there, let's say MVVM.
Sorry.
Would you just rename? Would you just refactor, add another layer such as this functional layer to the project, and then still use the MVVM model or not? Or
The beauty of this is that, as I said, I don't care what you do. You can do whatever the hell you want, as long as you're using concepts and ideas to refer to the code. That code you can do whatever way you want. You can use MVVM, you can use something else. That is the point of what I'm trying to get across. As long as you're not bound to something specific, but only to the ideas in the functionality, you're free to use whatever you want. You can absolutely do MVVM if that's what you're more comfortable with. As long as, you know, everything goes through the concepts and the messages, because that way you have one central point where you do things. You can absolutely integrate everything, but you have to do it mindfully. Do you see what I'm saying? You prefer MVVM? Go straight ahead. But keep things ordered. Because if you want to change library tomorrow, if you have MVVM only, then you're taking on the whole thing. If you're using this, you can change it gradually. So one of the problems with MVVM is that it's an all or nothing, basically. With this, you can do it incrementally.
You could use this messaging in the MVVM if you wanted to, couldn't you?
Yeah.
So for talking
Yeah.
between the different layers, and that would help to give it the abstraction that you're getting here.
Yeah, you absolutely could do that.
it seems to me like in the MVVM model, you don't need the UI concepts layer there.
You don't need to be. Yeah, you don't need to use that. Yes, that's correct. But I strongly advise you do.
If you're doing an FMX and a VCL application, you know, where you want to use both, you can use the concepts in the view, and that would perhaps make the view writing simpler, and then use the messages to talk to it. So you've still got that view concept there. It's just a different way of setting it up.
Yep. And as I said, this is not the only way to do things. This is just an example of what you can do.
But
my main worry here is that people are not taking action towards getting their code to work on different platforms. And that's going to be huge coming forward. It's always going to be more requested, and people are going to be more interested in having this kind of thing.
Just one question, Andre. If you've got different implementations, for instance, a FireMonkey and a VCL application, how do you physically implement it? Do you have some sort of, is your abstraction layer sitting in some kind of server?
Well, then, for example, this data module, let's take this. This is currently looking at the data set, but it could be making a remote call to your remote server.
Okay.
Now, to give you an idea of this, hold on. Take the difference between this, okay,
Yep.
and this.
Yep.
Do you see a lot of difference?
No.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're using the same.
The same exact kind of code.
Right. Okay. 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 So it's not.
They are uncannily similar, aren't they?
Yeah.
This is kind of my point.
Yeah.
The only way you know they're different is if you actually look at the calls. But here is the thing. And this is where things get even more interesting. You see how here we use this to refer to the control. As I said before, you can refer to any class. You could have the same kind of if here.
Okay.
And you could have the same exact name for both.
Okay.
Each one referring to a different implementation.
So it's the same.
And you use
source
the
code.
same exact name.
Same source code for each implementation.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you could, when you do make new control, that might be a button, or it might be an edit, or it might be something else.
Yeah, for now it's just a T-win control or T-control,
Yeah.
whatever. But it could be, you could have a TXP button.
Yeah.
Which might be a TMS out of button in VCL, and could be an FNC button in FireMonkey, for example.
Yep.
Or even it could be a T button in the VCL, and it could be an FNC button in FireMonkey. Who cares? Not my problem. You are the masters of your systems. You have to say what is right and what is wrong. As long as you approach the problem in a smart way. Make sense?
So
I'm
when
not
something
here to judge
happens,
what you do.
yeah. So if somebody clicks the button, for instance, then you send a message, and the message goes off, and you get a message back, and then you do something.
Yes, exactly. That's the whole point.
So if once you get into some decent code, you'd have an awful lot of messages, wouldn't you?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You wind up with thousands of messages. Yes.
So you really have to think about what your messages are and how your data
Exactly.
needs to be processed.
Oh yeah. Which is why I was saying you will get it wrong initially. I guarantee you. But this is something you can do in steps.
Yeah, I
You
start
know?
to see why it might be good for documentation, because you got this message doing this, and then you get this message back. That would be-
Exactly. Exactly. You start to think in terms of flows. What goes back and forth? Does it make sense?
Yep.
How big an application have you actually implemented using this?
I have tried to push this many times with different clients, but they were all too afraid to try. I'm basically using this with everything I do, but nothing has come out yet commercially with this yet. It should in some time. But the problem with this kind of thing is that because there is not one way to do this, the uncertainty is at really sky-high levels, okay? People have to be sold on the idea first, and that's really difficult. This is why this is ongoing research for me. I want to make it really difficult to say no.
Have
Yeah,
you
I
got
guess
any?
if you
Yeah,
could
but-
drag and drop things and go clonk, and then you've got messages going associated places, that'd be handy, wouldn't it? Like RAD only in this sort of methodology.
The main advantage of messages compared to, for example, actions is that messages can be received in a broadcast way. So you could have, for example, a frame that receives a selected user message to show the user information. And then you could have a footer frame that receives a selected user information to show the selected user in the status bar, for example. And each uses the result of the message in a different way, but they're both using the same message. That is one of the really wonderful things about messages. With actions, you don't have that.
Do you have any suggestions for getting started, approaches to take or methods to?
As I was saying earlier, the biggest thing is to get started and know that your first couple of attempts will probably not be right. Because you will think that doing this a couple of times will show you how much more complication there is in your system than you originally thought.
But if you were starting a new project and you wanted to adopt it?
No, you can start with something existing in your current project.
Yeah, but if you've got a new project and you think, oh, this looks like a cool idea, I'm going to write this using it. I haven't got much code that I'm wanting to refactor. What would be your starting point?
My starting point would be what the user is looking at when the application is running. Okay. That is your guiding principle. What is the user seeing there? And how can I split it internally so that it's easy for me to get the user where he or she should be.
So are you saying, Andrea, what kind of device is it running on? Is it running on a computer desktop or a mobile phone?
What is the actual flow of things? What's happening in the screen? This is where I would start from.
Right.
Make sense?
Yep.
Have you considered using this across application
Pardon?
or across different instances of the same application or whatever? Like, okay, in one screen, it might update the customer details. You want that new details to be reflected in other instances of the same application or even a different application using the same data.
So what you do is you send a message, I want to update the customer details. A form shows up, a dialog saying, right? You update the customer details, you press OK. That sends a message to update to the system, right?
Yeah.
And then after sending that, and when you have successfully updated the message, the details, you send a message back saying, this customer has had its details updated. So now you are sending the result of the operation back to the system. And that might be to dialogue saying, yay, I did it. Or it could be to another frame, to a frame saying, okay, this was just updated. Or even both. Because by that point, you know that the customer has been updated because you have registered the success first before sending the message. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I'm trying to do similar thing, except I'm doing it across instances of application rather than within the application. For example, updating the product details would result in other instances of the same application refreshing the screen if it's looking at the same product. And but this usually requires using things like broadcasting a message to a channel.
Well, the way system messaging works is that that which wants to receive a message has to register for it.
Yeah.
So you only broadcast to registered entities. You do not broadcast to everything. So you might have a message that is broadcasted to a lot of different things, such as classes or frames or forms, and other messages that are actually not going to be registered to a lot of things. So that kind of evens out the flow, you know what I'm saying? So if something takes a little bit longer because there are a lot of registrations, other things will not take nearly as long because they are rarely looked at or looked at by very few things. So you have to be very careful balancing this act. As I said, the first couple of times you get it wrong. Trust me, I've tried. You have to accept that this is an investment for the long term. This is not a quick and dirty solution. You have to really think about things. You must really ponder the way you want to approach this. But it's what I'm saying is, yes, it's difficult. Yes, it will take time, but also, yes, it is absolutely worth that time. Does it make sense? Even if you just want to use a piece of this, even not everything, you can absolutely do that. But I think you will find that eventually you get something like this in the long term.
You know, we used to use databases for cross-instance sort of communications a little bit. So you could tell, you could sort of look at the database. Or never got triggers to work very well, but you know, you could alter something in the database and the other things
What
can
you
find
use,
it.
what you use is not my problem.
Yeah. No, just fair enough.
No,
Yeah, you can also
see what I'm
use
saying?
yeah. You can also
What
use
I'm saying is,
Windows
if you-
messaging. Mm.
yeah, if you have something in the database, for example, if you use Firebird and you use an alert in Firebird, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you have your FB alert component, right? An alert is raised, right? And what does it do? It sends a message. This is the sense in which I'm saying it's not my problem. Whatever you do, whatever your architecture is, as long as you are switching back into the flow, you're fine. You can do whatever you want. This is one big reason why I'm saying this is not the end all be all of everything. You have to adapt this idea to your actual system. It's fine to do things differently because no two systems are alike. You know? What you need is a way to make things uniform and reuse as much as you can. And this kind of approach provides you with that. But then the specifics must be your own because you're the only one who knows how your system works and what works for your system. Does it make sense? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm a very out of your way guy. I don't judge. I know that some systems have been around for 20, 30 years even. I know what it's like. This is why I'm saying this is the sort of thing you should be doing. But then the actual thing that you will be doing is different from this, probably. You should go as deep or as shallow as you think is appropriate. That's what I'm saying. Make sense?
Mm.
You mentioned having sort of a functional inspiration in the work that you're doing, and I was wondering if it had any relation back to like the old, pretty old, I guess, ideas of communicating sequential processes or actors, or is it anything like those ideas?
I think that in some ways this goes back to stuff like Erlang kind of thing with actors and stuff like that. That was a lot of my inspiration they took, and Haskell a bit, like the monads and stuff like that. I do really like to stick my nose everywhere in programming wise. So I have been influenced by so many things that it's difficult to pinpoint an exact origin for anything, you know? And besides, a lot of programming principles are really cyclic. So we go back and forth to the same things, essentially. So who knows? I mean, this has been baking at the back of my head for years before I started doing it. And then one day I went, hold on, I can do this.
Do you work in any other languages, and have you used these ideas in any other languages?
Yes, I have used the languages. I've used PHP. And I've done something like this in PHP. But at a much smaller scale, because I was having issues with the floating point numbers in PHP, and I needed to get, this was work for a bank, and they needed a budget apportionment with weighted months, and PHP was not helpful. Let's put it this way. So I had to do something along these lines, but on a much smaller scale, to get it to do what I wanted it to do instead of what it wanted to do and forcing me to do his way, you know? So I used basically much of the concepts, I think, originally come from that kind of code, probably, because of the difficulties I was having. I had to basically convert everything in cents. And that sort of got me started on this kind of reasoning. If you see what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying? I was trying to rein in what it was doing and have it do what I wanted. And that was not simple. And I had to use something along these lines to get it to work the right way. And I'm using this mostly on my own projects. There is something published on GitHub, actually, that uses the same sort of ideas. Hold on. Which is this uses the same sort of ideas, essentially. This is a library to transform UI dialogues in interfaces. Okay. So there is a demo project. Hold on. Let me put the link in the chat. Hold on. I can't. What? How do you? Oh, right. Well, oop, right. If you look at this, the main code. This is not unlike the concept idea, essentially. So for example, there is the inject, which changes the base class that you use to show the dialogues. So what you actually do you have a unit. This is not generic, but I think you can say that this is actually the origin of some of the ideas that I've come up with. So, for example, the dialogues here can provide an interface for the message dialogue function. See, this wraps the message dialogue API. So a lot of this stuff comes from, this is from 7 or even 8 years ago. It's like really, really old. And this probably was the initial baking for the whole idea. I haven't touched it for a long time. Today, I would probably use generics, I think. This, for example, was to, still is, to use RTTI with interfaces, by interfaces. So, for example, here you can decide how to include something or exclude a property based on, and all of this stuff is basically probably at the root of what I've been doing recently. I would say. Then again, I haven't touched this for a very long time because I've been working on this new set of ideas. But I think that a lot of stuff comes from here, basically. And probably this is the what most closely resembles this kind of code here now. Although this does not use a lot of interfaces, because I find that Delphi developers really struggle with interfaces. And so I wanted something that they could relate more readily. And this is why, but I would probably suggest that a lot of this stuff could be made easier by using interfaces and anonymous methods and all of that stuff. But for the time being, the most important thing is to get the messages and the concepts, because these can really change the way you write the code. For me, in my opinion, doesn't mean I'm right, you know? A lot of this, though, is also transferable to other languages that have generics, for example, such as C#. So you can still use the same ideas in completely different contexts. Does it make sense?
Yes. It's just one of those things. It's a concept rather than a rule. And it's something
Yes.
that we all have to sort of absorb and work out how it can work for us.
Yes, exactly. And I will repeat myself once more. I'm not saying that this is a quick and dirty solution to anything. You have to really design this. Like, for real. You have to think about it. It may be the case that it does not work for you at all. But the only way you can know that is by trying to make it work for you.
Mm.
Does it make sense?
Mm. So we've got to suck it and see.
That's the only way. That's, I mean, even if you just want to add the messages, that's fine. That's your choice. Maybe that's what works best for you. Maybe you are just too entrenched and it's basically impossible to untangle the whole thing. But maybe you can do that. Maybe that's easier.
It really depends on the
be,
project, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I have never said otherwise. In fact, I've been banging on that. In fact, one way to start with this is to start using messages first and get everything isolated in easy chunks. And then go from there, possibly. That might actually be the best approach for a lot of systems. Get that side working.
Yeah.
And then when you have that working, when you know that it's working for you, then look at the concept and look at how the whole thing should be defined or split up. It's also a great way to start a refactoring that is overdue.
Mm.
And you're not losing the knowledge. Because I'm not saying you should start afresh. Do everything this way. No, I'm saying use what you have, but in a smarter way. Does it make sense?
Yes, I think it does. Does anybody else have any more questions for Andrea? Well, they either understand it completely or they're completely baffled, Andrea.
A little bit of both.
I think they're all shell-shocked.
Shell-shocked, yes, that might be a way. But you've certainly given us something to think about.
What sort of feedback did you have at your Italian DevCon? Def-
Yeah,
Delphi?
this is
Delphicon.
this is the thing I presented there. And it was immediately after lunch. And I was like, are you all sleeping? Don't worry, I'll wake you up right now.
Did you get
And
any
I got,
good
Pardon?
questions from them that we might have missed?
the questions were broadly similar. And despite me repeating over and over again that you have to work on a project by project basis, they were still trying to figure out how what they were seeing on screen would fit with their system. And I was like, no, that's not what you do. Have you even listened to what I said? And I kept repeating it to them as well. Because the idea here is that this allows you for far more flexibility than you currently have. And I know it does, because I've seen so many systems in over 20 years. That's just painful. I just know what they're like. Maybe the only one who's a bit different is Vincent, but besides that, I can see you.
Yeah, I'm not very sure that flexibility is such a great option always. You sort of force down a single line, at least other people also force down that line, can see what you're doing.
I keep saying every system is different. Every code base is different. Different code bases, different solutions.
Mm.
But you can follow along the same kind of path. If nothing else, looking into this will get you to go and look at code you haven't looked at in what, like 5-10 years? Let's be honest. I can see you. I know what you like because I am like you. I've had the exact same issues.
Yeah, if it
Right.
ain't broke, don't look at it.
Yep.
Because looking at it might break it.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's been a really thought-provoking talk, Andrea. Thank you for that.
Welcome. As I said at the beginning, the punishment for having me here is a huge headache.
Yes, I can see that there'll be more discussion of this next month when we've all had a chance to digest it.
Yep. If you do it on a Monday, I might even be here.
Right. Well, we'll see what happens with our meeting next time.
Because on Mondays I'm not invoicing.
Right.
So it's a lot easier for me to juggle things.
Yes. Well, I think if nobody's got any more questions on this or anything else, it's getting up to 9 o'clock. We might call it quits and see if we can sleep with all of these thoughts running around in our minds.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre.
Oh, you're welcome. Anytime.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Have a good night.
Good
You
night.
have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye all.